You are in the Ko-Whai room. Our session is on repairability. It will last just under 15 minutes, and then we'll get a chance to switch to another room or stay here, and I'll be posting all those links in the chat as well. I'll just quickly introduce myself again. I'm Michelle Hollis, and I'm from Te Pūtahi. And also, I will reintroduce speakers. So we have Paul Smith, who is from Consumer New Zealand. Paul, I gather you actually started your career as a mechanical design engineer. So you do know really rather a lot about how things go together. And we've also got with Paul Alan Liefting, who is the owner and head honcho at EcoTech Services here in Christchurch. Alan knows a lot about appliance servicing, as well as having a passion for conservation and the environment. I'm going to ask a couple of questions to start, and then please just pop your questions in the chat and I'll try and manage them as best I can from there. Maybe I'll start with you, Alan. So, are electronics and appliances in general really just not very reliable these days? I mean, speaking for myself, we have in our house 4 defunct phones, 2 laptops that no longer work, 1 desktop that doesn't work, 1 bread maker that doesn't make bread, and 1 coffee machine that does no longer, well, coffee grinder that no longer grinds coffee. So is it that the appliances are just not fit for purpose?
It comes down to how good they are, how well they're built. Quite often, very old appliances are quite reliable, and often quite new appliances are quite unreliable. It comes down to the quality of how well they're built, and also how it's used. For instance, everybody's pair of headphones has got frayed at the end, and it can't easily be repaired. But there's no reason why modern appliances can't last for a very long time. It pretty much comes down to the how well it's been built and how it's been looked after as well.
And Paul, from your point of view, what do you see the key issues as being? Durability or repairability, or both?
I think it's a bit of both. I guess the biggest frustration for me is that so many things that go wrong are things that should be really easy to repair. So we accept that, or most people accept that over the lifetime of a product, it's going to go wrong at some point, or a lot of products are going to go wrong. And the biggest issue I see is that a lot of those faults are things that we should be able to fix, and they don't need specialist expertise to do so. It might be something like the blade of a blender or the bowl of a blender that fails. That's something that a consumer can fix themselves. But we're just thwarted because too often those parts aren't available, and the whole thing ends up being junked.
I'll put this question to you first, Paul, actually, with Alan following up. Colleen asked, my husband and I moved back to Apple and have been deeply disappointed at what appears to be ferocious built-in obsolescence. And Apple, of course, are just notorious for changing those little bits at the end of the chargers, for goodness sake. So can you comment on the big IT cultures that are at play here and what we can do? I mean, we're tiny people at the end of the world.
Yeah, it's hard to fight the fight against big tech, right? They're big, and they've got a lot of industry and weight to lobby against everything. Yeah, it is a problem, and it's hard to point to something that is going to fix that really easily, because if you want a phone, you want the latest iPhone, you're going to get the latest iPhone. What we're finding is that we're trying to push people to say, do I need the latest and greatest model? I think that's where we can all start, is to say, you know, we test a whole load of smartphones at consumer, and we find there are real small incremental differences between the iPhone 12 and the iPhone 11 and 10 and whatever before that. And for the vast majority of us, we don't need the new one. We can keep going with the old one. And so that's where I would start, is to say, let's just reset our values and say, what do I actually need out of this product? Do I need to buy the new one, or shall I stick with the one that we've got? And I think that's one way we can get into big tech and start to say, we don't want constant new models that are being released every single year.
Alan, what about the availability of parts? To what extent, for example, do people come to you looking for second-hand parts because they actually can't find a new, the retailer says, oh, we can't get parts?
Oh, yes, so spare parts are certainly quite a problem. Some spare parts are available, but they're notoriously expensive. An example is a microwave oven, which is very easy to repair, but a replacement transformer for it may be $300, and that's what someone paid for the microwave oven in the first place. So there is this price gouging with spare parts, but yes, you certainly can, and we certainly do at EcoTech Services, you can use second-hand parts because you get to know how reliable a second-hand part is. You know that a transformer very rarely fails, whereas other parts like a lamp does regularly fail. So there's certainly lots of things that can be done by salvaging parts out of old items, but it shouldn't really be that way. Spare parts should be readily available and at a reasonable cost, and that's increasingly not happening.
Paul, is there anything by way of changes that you mentioned in your main talk to the Consumer Guarantees Act that would fix that?
The Consumer Guarantee, one of the issues that's coming up with the Consumer Guarantees Act is there's this loophole that says we don't need to repair things. But the bigger issue, and it's a problem here and in Australia because they have a similar law, is that it's just not enforced. So it's very rare to see companies put that disclaimer up that says, oh, we don't fix things. But we all know there are so many companies that don't fix things. I mean, let's just point at Kmart and the warehouse and all those appliances you buy from them. And they're never going to give you spare parts, but they don't tell you up front that they're not going to give you spare parts. So one of the issues is that we're not enforcing this. And partly that comes down to consumers not raising complaints. But why are we going to raise a complaint if they give me a new blender instead of fix the one that's broken? I'm happy with that. And partly because people like the Commerce Commission just aren't resourced to go and do it. So, I don't know if changing the Consumer Guarantees Act to get rid of that loophole, I think it's a good start, but I think we just need to change our culture of just calling people out with this and doing that through sort of governmental processes as well.
So, Paul, Karen has asked specifically of you, do you think the e-waste product stewardship scheme will be good enough?
It could be. It could be if we create an e-waste product stewardship scheme that puts some real responsibility on manufacturers and retailers to take ownership. My fear with the product stewardship scheme is that it's going to be a cost put on manufacturers that gets passed through to consumers, and it will help us still at the back end of being able to recycle more and develop recycling facilities, but the manufacturers are going to get away with it. That's my cynical hat.
Could manufacturers do a better job of using universal components?
I can answer that. It is the case that with modern electronics, there's a lot of very much purpose-built specialist components which aren't readily available because they're made in a manufacturing run and not made available as spare parts. But there's actually quite a good example that came out of the EU bloc. The fact that we've got a universal charger for our cell phones, apart from Apple, but that's another story. It's called the micro B USB. That came out of pressure from the EU on mobile phone manufacturers to produce a universal charger to prevent wastage. Prior to that, there was any number of different chargers and they weren't compatible with your new model or across different manufacturers. So we can thank the EU for the fact that we've got slightly less wastage on cell phone chargers.
I see in the meeting that we have Sue Coots. So I was just wondering if you wanted to make any comments about the product stewardship. I need to unmute you, don't I? Let's see. see if that works. Yep.
Yeah, I guess that it's really challenging. Like we can see all over Europe, there's people sort of struggling with this at the moment, whether they're going, okay, we thought product stewardship was going to push back upstream and start to change the behavior of producers and shift them. And it hasn't really been successful in the way that Paul said. It's given us a bit of cash to put into the recycling side, but it hasn't really driven change at the design side. And I feel as though that piece of the puzzle is something that people are still working to solve. I guess that the idea that I was talking about a bit earlier is that idea of, how do you get those connections happening right across the supply and recovery chain? So you have the feedback loops going back up to say, okay, I guess consumers can choose not to buy things which are not repairable. And in that case, you need really good information at the point of purchase just to be able to make a good decision, and that's not there at the moment. If we want government to say we're not going to import stuff that can't be repaired, or we're going to have some rules at the border. So I think in Europe they're trying two different things. They're trying one which is, can we have product stewardship schemes that work, or do we have laws which say you're not allowed to put these products onto the market unless they meet certain criteria? So I think it's a bit of a work in progress.
Thank you, Sue. It's clearly phone charges are a thing that really gets up people's nose. We're about to finish, so I wondered if Alan and Paul could give one piece of advice for people designing and manufacturing electronic goods in particular from now on, while I paste the links for the next sessions into the chat. Alan, do you want to go first?
I'll go first. I have to think about this. It does come down to building items of quality, but of course the manufacturers aren't necessarily building items of quality, because if they do, they won't get as many sales because people buy them, often buy them price, and of course you get what you pay for. If you don't pay much, you don't get much. I think I'll just leave it at that. It is a big question that you're asking, but requires quite a lot of to reply to it. I'll see what Paul's thoughts are.
Well, I would say I don't think it's possible to design something that is going to be infinitely repairable or never fail. But what we know is that there are certain things that fail. And if we focus on those and say, well, let's fix those, or let's make those repairable, then we can solve a big proportion of the problem that we have. So if you take a smartphone and you say, okay, we know the battery's going to wear out over time through charging, and we know we're going to drop it and break the screen. So if we could just say, oh, let's just design one of these things with an easily replaceable battery and an easily replaceable screen, or one that's not going to break so easily in the first place, and we make those parts available to people, and we make them so that people can fit them themselves, then that's the majority of smartphone problems, repair problems solved. It doesn't have to be let's change everything that we do. So let's tackle the things we can and make a difference that way.